channel.
For centuries, they've haunted our oceans, slipped through our stories, and whispered through the waves. Were they just myths? Or something far more spiritual? From ancient gods like Dagon, to African water spirits like Mami Wata, and even the terrifying Leviathan of the Bible, these so-called mermaids may not be fairy tales at all. What if they're real? What if they're watching? Tonight, we dive into the hidden truth behind marine spirits, beautiful, deadly, and deeply deceptive. Are you ready to look beneath the surface? Dagon, the merman god of the Philistines and is linked to mermaid lore. While mermaids are often thought of as whimsical creatures of fantasy, their roots may reach far deeper, into ancient religion and sacred texts. One particularly compelling figure is Dagon, a god from the ancient Mesopotamian and Philistine pantheon, who may represent one of the earliest documented examples of a merman-like deity. Often overlooked in mainstream discussions of mythology, Dagon offers a crucial bridge between spiritual worship and the imagery of half-human, half-fish beings. Dagon was worshipped by the Philistines, a people who settled in Canaan between 1200 and 600 BCE, and his temples were located in major cities like Gaza and Ashdod, as referenced in the Hebrew Bible. While interpretations of his form vary, some scholars and historical records describe Dagon as having the body of a fish from the waist down and the torso of a man, a striking resemblance to the modern depiction of a merman. This depiction of Dagon not only appears in historical texts but was also reinforced in early Christian literature, where pagan gods were often recast as demonic or monstrous beings. The most direct references to Dagon can be found in books like Judges, 1 Samuel, and Joshua, where he is labeled as the chief deity of the Philistines. In one biblical account, the Ark of the Covenant is captured and placed in Dagon's temple. The next day, the statue of Dagon is found fallen, its head and hands broken, suggesting the superiority of Israel's God over the pagan deity. Yet, this narrative also reflects how deeply rooted and established Dagon worship was in the region, and how the spiritual power associated with him was taken seriously. What makes Dagon especially interesting in the study of mermaid origins is his iconography and mythological role. Unlike later depictions of mermaids as seductive sea maidens, Dagon represents a god of fertility, grain, and the sea, suggesting a connection between abundance, the ocean, and the divine. This dual role as a god of both land and water aligns with the mystical symbolism we now associate with mermaids, creatures caught between two worlds. Furthermore, Dagon's image as a fish-man figure suggests that the belief in aquatic humanoids didn't start with medieval sailor tales, but may have originated from religious symbolism and ancient deities. If early civilizations were already worshipping beings that looked like merfolk, then the leap from god to spirit to mythological creature becomes much more plausible. In this light, Dagon may not just be a forgotten god of a lost people, but a foundational figure in the long and winding evolution of mermaid mythology. His existence adds weight to the idea that what we now dismiss as folklore may actually stem from deep historical reverence and ancient spiritual beliefs. Whether merman, god, or something else entirely, Dagon challenges us to reconsider the origins of the myths we think we understand. Historical sightings of mermaids, coincidence or something more? Throughout human history, mermaid sightings have been recorded in various parts of the world, often by credible witnesses and in surprising detail. These reports go far beyond sailor tales or drunken hallucinations. From Christopher Columbus to humble Welsh farmers, many accounts suggest that mermaids, or beings that resemble them, may have been more than myth. While skeptics attribute such sightings to sea creatures misidentified and poor lighting, the consistency across cultures and centuries hints at something far more mysterious. One of the earliest well-documented sightings comes from Christopher Columbus himself. In 1493, while sailing near what is now Haiti, Columbus wrote in his journal about seeing 3 mermaids rise out of the sea. He noted they were not as beautiful as legends suggested, but they were unmistakably humanoid in shape, with fish-like features. This report is especially striking, considering Columbus was an educated navigator, not someone prone to fantasy. Another compelling account comes from Wales in 1603, where a farmer named Thomas Rold reportedly saw a mermaid off the coast near Pendy. What sets this encounter apart is that it wasn't an isolated observation. Rold called over multiple witnesses, and they watched the mermaid for 3 full hours. The creature was described as a monstrous fish with the upper body of a woman, The incident caused such a stir that an illustration of the mermaid was created in 1604, serving as one of the earliest visual records of such a being in the British Isles. These sightings weren't limited to the Western world. In various African and indigenous cultures, similar creatures have been reported near rivers and coastlines, often not seen as mythical beasts, but as spiritual or supernatural entities. This spiritual aspect adds another layer to the mystery. If mermaids are not physical beings, but interdimensional or spiritual entities, it might explain why they appear sporadically, often during moments of emotional or environmental intensity. In Norwegian manuscripts from the 13th century, mermaids and mermen were viewed not as alluring beings, but as monsters and omens. One such text described a towering merman that rose straight out of the sea, with broad shoulders but no hands. Whenever it appeared, storms would follow. This idea of mermaids as harbingers of doom is echoed in multiple traditions and suggests that, far from being harmless legends, these beings may be connected to natural forces and omens beyond our understanding. The common thread across these accounts is that mermaids are not simply figments of imagination or romanticized myths. When fishermen, farmers, sailors, and villagers, all with no connection to one another, report similar beings across centuries and continents, we're left with a difficult question: are these sightings mere coincidence, or are they glimpses into a hidden dimension of reality? Perhaps the answer lies not in proving their existence, but in asking why so many people from so many walks of life have seen them. Mermaids may be elusive, but their imprint on history is undeniable, and maybe, just maybe, they're still watching us from the depths. Mami Wata, Africa's mysterious water spirit and her link to mermaid lore. In the heart of African spiritual tradition lies a powerful and enigmatic figure known as Mami Wata, a water spirit often associated with mermaids but believed to be far more complex and powerful. Revered in West, Central, and Southern Africa, and throughout the Afro-American diaspora, Mami Wata is not just a myth, but a living belief system for many. She embodies beauty, danger, spiritual wisdom, and the mystical link between water and the spirit world. Unlike the gentle mermaids of fairy tales, Mami Wata is both worshipped and feared. She is believed to dwell in rivers, oceans, and lakes, and her presence is felt during rituals involving music, dance, and trance-possession. Followers perform intense ceremonies with drums, harmonicas, and African guitars, dancing until they enter a spiritual trance. At that point, Mami Wata is said to possess the dancer, speaking through them and offering visions, guidance, or even warnings. These moments are not imagined, they are real experiences shared by entire communities, passed down through generations. Mami Wata's physical appearance can vary. Sometimes she is depicted as a stunningly beautiful woman with long flowing hair, often holding a mirror or snake. Other times, she takes the form of a mermaid with a fish's tail and human upper body. Her name, believed to come from Pidgin English for mother water, reflects her status as a goddess or spirit of the sea, a nurturer, a seducer, and a force of nature. In many African cultures, encounters with Mami Wata are not fictional, they are real and often terrifying. In Zimbabwe, for example, during the construction of a dam, workers began to report sightings of pale-skinned, dark-haired creatures with fishtails emerging from the water. These beings were described not only as strange but hostile. Some workers claimed they were attacked, and a few even disappeared, pulled into the depths, never to return. The fear was so intense that the entire crew abandoned the project. Only after tribal leaders performed rituals to ask permission from the water spirits could the work resume. Such stories are common, and they reinforce the idea that Mami Wata is not merely a symbolic figure, but a spiritual entity with real-world consequences. She is said to abduct people, either her devotees or random swimmers, and take them to her underwater spiritual realm. If they return, they do so transformed, with dry clothes, no memory of time past, but often possessing new knowledge or gifts. This blending of fear, reverence, and mystery places Mami Wata in a unique space between deity and mermaid. While the Western world may see mermaids as fantasy, many African traditions understand them as gatekeepers to the spirit world, capable of both blessing and cursing. Mami Wata is more than myth, she is a reminder that the waters are alive, watching, and, for some, willing to reach out and take you under. Rain Mallard and the Fishwoman, a disturbing encounter on Murray Island. Among all the tales of mermaids throughout history, Fewer as unsettling and thought-provoking is the one told by Rain Mellard, a U.S. Navy officer who had an extraordinary encounter while stationed on Maria Island, part of the Indonesian archipelago. His account, unlike myth or legend, was not passed down through generations or wrapped in symbolism. It was personal, vivid, and deeply disturbing. It suggests that mermaids may not simply be spiritual beings or folklore, but real, physical entities, hidden in the depths of our oceans. According to Mellard, his encounter began on what seemed like an ordinary day. A group of local fishermen had gathered by the shore, causing a commotion. Curious, Mellard approached and witnessed them pulling a thrashing creature from their net. At first glance, he thought it was a large fish or perhaps a shark struggling to escape. But as he looked closer, he was shocked to see a form that appeared shockingly human. The creature, which Mellard later called a fishwoman, had a body that matched the classic image of a mermaid, but not the graceful, alluring version we see in art or fantasy. Its lower half resembled a dolphin, with smooth skin and dual fins, but its upper half was eerily human, though not conventionally attractive. Mellard described it as having coarse features, a long pointed nose, and a body covered in thick hair that extended even onto its tail. Its skin was a soft pinkish red, almost glowing in the sunlight. Disturbed by the fishermen's intention to leave the creature tangled in the net to die, Mellard pleaded with them to let it go. But they refused, saying they wouldn't kill it directly, but it would perish on its own. For over half an hour, the fishwoman struggled, crying like a human infant, before eventually collapsing from exhaustion. Horrified, Mellard rushed to get help, but by the time he returned, the creature was dead. Examining the body, Mellard noted that it had 4 fingers and 2 thumbs on each hand, a detail that defied biological logic. The local villagers were unfazed, claiming that these creatures were not rare. In fact, they said they often lived in large schools, and would avoid human contact, diving deep into the sea when boats approached. According to the fishermen, these beings sometimes crawled onto beaches at night, moving with their hands, further reinforcing their human-like qualities. This event deeply affected Mellard, challenging his view of the world. For him, it was not just an encounter with a strange sea creature, it was a moment that blurred the line between myth and reality. His story, though anecdotal, is detailed and emotionally charged, leaving readers and researchers alike to wonder, are mermaids truly just folklore, or are they real beings that have simply mastered the art of avoiding us? Sirens, from mythical singers to cursed women in the Book of Enoch. Most people are familiar with sirens from Greek and Roman mythology, those hauntingly beautiful beings who, with hypnotic songs, lured sailors to their deaths on rocky shores. In classical literature, they were often described as half-bird, half-woman creatures, perched on island cliffs, their melody a deadly trap for any passing ship. But this well-known image of sirens may not tell the full story. According to the Book of Enoch, an ancient religious text not included in the traditional Bible, sirens were not just mythological monsters, they were once human women, cursed for their sins. The Book of Enoch, particularly in section 19-2, reveals a darker origin. Sirens were the women who mated with the fallen angels, known as the Watchers. These forbidden unions produced monstrous offspring, giants and demons, that wreaked havoc on humanity. As punishment for their role in this unholy alliance, the women themselves were transformed into sirens. In this telling, the sirens are no longer seductive singers by nature, but rather damned souls, exiled from the human world and bound to a new form. This version radically changes how we understand sirens and their connection to mermaid lore. If we view sirens as cursed women, half human, half supernatural, it's easy to see how over time, their image could evolve into that of mermaids. Instead of wings and claws, the emphasis shifted to tails and ocean habitats, especially in cultures that associate the sea with the spiritual realm. Their power to enchant and destroy remained, but their appearance became more aquatic. This evolution may explain why, in some traditions, mermaids are not just mysterious sea creatures but malevolent entities. They share many traits with the sirens of Enoch, alluring yet dangerous, beautiful but deceptive. These are not harmless figures of folklore, they are symbols of divine punishment, representing the consequences of crossing spiritual boundaries. Furthermore, this spiritual origin helps to explain why physical evidence of mermaids is so scarce. If they are, in fact, spiritual beings, caught between dimensions, as the Book of Enoch suggests, then their appearances would be rare. unpredictable, and tied to metaphysical events. They would not live among us, but rather appear when conditions align, often during times of emotional turmoil, danger, or spiritual vulnerability. In essence, the sirens of the Book of Enoch and the mermaids of global folklore may be one and the same, descendants of human sin, reborn into a form that exists between worlds. Their songs may not only enchant, but also deceive. Their beauty may hide a curse, and their presence in myth may be less about fantasy and more about a forgotten truth, that some beings walk a fine line between human, divine, and demonic. The deceptive nature of marine spirits. Are mermaids more than they seem? Throughout folklore and spiritual traditions around the world, mermaids, sirens, and water spirits like Mami Wata have long been surrounded by mystery, allure, and fear. But beyond the myths and romantic depictions, there exists a darker, more profound belief, one that sees these beings not as physical sea creatures, but as spiritual entities, often deceptive in nature. This belief is especially prominent in biblical interpretations and African spiritual traditions, where such beings are known as marine spirits. Marine spirits are said to reside in water, oceans, rivers, lakes, but unlike animals or mythical beings, they are not bound to the physical world. They can manifest at will, appearing to humans in various forms, often beautiful and seductive, but their purpose is not always benign. In African spirituality, entities like Mami Wata are revered and feared. She may bring wealth and power, but often in exchange for loyalty, offerings, or even human lives. In some stories, she abducts individuals and takes them to a spiritual underwater realm. If they return, they are never the same, changed mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. This aligns closely with what the Bible warns about. The Book of Enoch describes sirens as cursed women who birthed demons with fallen angels. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul speaks of Satan disguising himself as an angel of light, and in many theological interpretations, marine spirits are seen as demons cloaked in beauty. They don't come with horns and fire, they come with elegance, charm, and gifts. That's what makes them so dangerous. Consider the nature of mermaid sightings throughout history. They often involve brief encounters, a fleeting glimpse at sea, a creature vanishing into the depths, or a mysterious figure appearing only during certain rituals or dreams. This behavior is consistent with spiritual, interdimensional beings, not flesh and blood animals. Their elusiveness may not be due to rarity, but due to their supernatural essence. They appear when they choose, not when humans search. Furthermore, the idea that these spirits offer blessings in exchange for worship or allegiance is also present in many belief systems. In African tradition, some followers claim they gain wealth and influence through marine spirits, but only after intense rituals, dreams, and sometimes personal sacrifice. This is echoed in Western esoteric accounts, where sea spirits are said to offer temptations that ultimately ensnare the soul. So, are mermaids real? Perhaps not in the way we imagine them, frolicking sea creatures with flowing hair and shimmering tails, but very real as spiritual presences. They may not live in coral palaces, but in the unseen world, operating through dreams, rituals, and temptations. They are mystics of the deep, spiritual forces that both attract and deceive. In the end, their greatest power may not lie in their beauty or song, but in our willingness to believe that they are harmless. Leviathan, the sea serpent of Scripture and the king of marine spirits. Among all the spiritual entities connected to the sea, Leviathan stands out as one of the most feared and mysterious. Described in both the Old Testament and spiritual lore as a colossal sea monster, Leviathan is more than just a mythological creature. It is considered the king of marine spirits, a being that embodies not only physical terror but also deep spiritual corruption. Understanding Leviathan's role in biblical texts offers valuable insight into how marine spirits, including mermaids, sirens, and water deities like Mami Wata, can represent both literal and metaphysical threats. In Isaiah 27:1, the Bible states, "In that day the Lord with his severe sword, great and strong, will punish Leviathan the fleeing serpent, Leviathan that twisted serpent, and he will slay the reptile that is in the sea." This vivid imagery suggests that Leviathan is not merely a symbol, but an actual supernatural sea creature, destined to be defeated by divine power. Similarly, Psalm 74:14 reads, "You crushed the heads of Leviathan, you gave him as food to the creatures of the wilderness." These verses paint a picture of Leviathan as both a physical entity of chaos and a spiritual enemy of God. But Leviathan is not just a monster, it is a representation of pride, rebellion, and spiritual deception. In some theological interpretations, Leviathan's spirit is said to influence human behavior, particularly in promoting arrogance, stubbornness, and resistance to divine truth. This mirrors how marine spirits are often described across different cultures, offering power, beauty, or riches, but ultimately leading individuals away from righteousness. What makes Leviathan especially significant is its dual identity. On one hand, it is a terrifying sea creature, massive, reptilian, untamable. On the other, it is a demonic spirit, ruling over other marine entities and tempting humans into spiritual bondage. This fusion of the physical and the spiritual is a theme that runs deep in marine lore. It supports the idea that beings like mermaids or Mami Wata might also possess this duality, appearing in flesh, yet operating from the spiritual realm. Leviathan also connects to the concept of marine spirits offering material gain in exchange for spiritual submission. In African spiritual practices, for instance, Mami Wata is known to bless followers with wealth, success, or beauty, but often at the cost of obedience or sacrifice. Similarly, Leviathan is believed by some to reward pride and rebellion in exchange for spiritual enslavement. These beings don't force, they seduce, they promise, they deceive. In essence, Leviathan is not just a monster of the sea, it is a spiritual force of darkness, reigning beneath the waves, influencing both human hearts and supernatural realms. If it truly is the king over all the children of pride, as many believe, then its story serves as a warning: not all that glimmers in the deep is divine. Sometimes, the sea hides something far more dangerous, a serpent cloaked in mystery, ruling in silence, waiting to strike.